When I got back from vacation, my suitcase was still sitting in the hallway. But my bedroom already belonged to someone else. My daughter-in-law had ordered all my furniture moved down to the basement and booked me a room at a local motel. My son didn't say a single word, so I didn't say anything either. I just picked my suitcase back up and reminded myself that every single account, every utility contract, and every key to that house was still in my name. You don't lose a home to an earthquake. You lose it to the constant, quiet scraping of footsteps, slowly crowding you out of your own space. I stood in the foyer of my house in Portland, my purse clutched tightly in my hands, as the scent of unfamiliar perfume and burnt coffee hit me. Chloe, my daughter-in-law, didn't even look up from her laptop when I closed the front door behind me. My son Julian sat at the kitchen table, his head bowed deeply over his smartphone, as if he were just a stranger waiting around in a transit lounge. We had just returned from a 3-day family trip to the Oregon coast, a trip meant to celebrate family, but one that had left me feeling like a hitchhiker in the back seat. "We had to shuffle the rooms upstairs." "Evelyn," Chloe said flatly, her fingers never leaving the keyboard. "The kids need their own space for middle school now, and your old bedroom is just the most logical spot for Leo's new desk." Her voice carried the cold, clinical detachment of a real estate agent executing an eviction notice. Julian didn't move. He just swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the oak table that my late husband had sanded down with his own hands. I didn't feel an urge to scream or throw a fit. At 67, I had learned that being loud only gave away your weakness. Instead, a deep, almost soothing clarity washed over me. Over the last few months, they had forgotten whose foundation they were actually standing on. My furniture had already been hauled down to the basement without anyone bothering to ask. A throw blanket I'd never buy was draped over my favorite armchair. "And where exactly am I supposed to sleep?" I asked, calmly keeping my voice as steady as the concrete under this house. Chloe paused, looked up, and flashed a thin, practiced smile. "We booked you a really nice room for the week at the inn down by the transit station. It's all paid for, Evelyn. There's just no room for you in the house right now, at least not until we get everything reorganized." She thought she had isolated me. She thought I would cry. I turned around in silence, picked up my suitcase, and walked out the door before Julian could even find the courage to look me in the eye. But they had no idea what I was going to do on my way to that motel. The motel room smelled of cheap pine cleaner and cold linoleum. A small window looked out over the gray asphalt of the parking lot and the commuter trains passing by. Chloe had chosen this place because it was cheap and far enough away to keep me out of her sight line. I set my suitcase down, sat on the stiff mattress, and opened my purse. Inside was the small black notebook I had kept since my husband passed away. It didn't hold diary entries. It held numbers, dates, and facts. Julian and Chloe had been living in my house for 2 years. They claimed they wanted to save up money to buy their own place, but instead they had begun chipping away at my life piece by piece. They had taken over the household expenses account supposedly to take the burden off me. My monthly contribution for groceries had steadily risen while my say in my own home had dropped to 0. I checked the time. It was just before 8 in the evening. The banks were closed, but my online banking worked perfectly fine on my tablet. I logged into the joint account I had set up back then for the house's fixed expenses. Chloe had authorized access, but the core funds came from my survivor benefits and my husband's savings. First, I canceled the automatic withdrawals for her private subscriptions, which she had brazenly been running through the account. Then I transferred every single cent of the remaining balance into my private personal account, one only I could touch. It wasn't stealing. It was my money, which they had been treating like a personal slush fund. As I shut down the tablet, I didn't feel tired. I felt wide awake. They thought a cheap motel room was my prison, but it had just become my headquarters. Tomorrow was Monday, and the automatic payments for Chloe's expensive SUV lease and the kids' private extracurricular activities were due. I lay down and slept deeply while the trains rolled by outside. They thought they had successfully pushed me out, but the real cutoff wasn't going to be about living space. The phone rang the next morning at exactly 8:15 a.m. I was already downstairs in the lobby, drinking a surprisingly decent strong cup of black tea. Chloe's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring 3 times before picking up, staying completely silent. Evelyn, what is going on with the account? Chloe's voice had lost every bit of its cool, elegant composure from the night before. She sounded shrill, almost panicked. My car payment was declined, and the transaction for the groceries at Whole Foods was blocked too. What did you do? I took a slow sip of my tea, savoring the warmth and the quiet of the room. I closed the house account, Chloe. I said, my voice as matter-of-fact as a bank statement. Since I'm not living in the house this week, I don't need to cover household expenses. After all, as you said, the motel is already paid for. You can't do that, she yelled, and I could hear Julian pacing around anxiously in the background. We have bills to pay. Julian, say something. But Julian didn't say a thing. He never spoke up when it actually mattered. He had always hidden behind his wife's decisions as long as they secured him a comfortable life. The deed to the house is in my name, Chloe. I continued, calm and precise. The money in that account belonged to me. If you can't make your payments, you might want to rethink your spending. Have a wonderful day. I hung up before she could reply. After that, I went back up to my room, grabbed my coat, and headed out into the city. There was one more thing I needed to take care of, and it didn't require lawyers or courts. I just needed the man who had been servicing my home's HVAC system for 20 years, whose number I knew by heart. Winter was right around the corner, and the control over the house's energy was entirely in my hands. Mr. Miller, the heating technician, met me at 11 o'clock in a small coffee shop near City Hall. He was an older man with calloused hands who had known my husband well. He knew exactly how much hard work had gone into building that house. Mrs. Weber, he said, tipping his cap. Good to see you. What can I do for you? Any trouble with the old furnace? No, Mr. Miller, I replied, sliding a cup of coffee toward him. The furnace runs beautifully, but I want you to switch the smart thermostat system over to the app on my new tablet. My son and daughter-in-law have been messing with the settings, and since I pay the gas bills, I want full control over the temperature. Set the baseline for the upstairs floor to 59 degrees Fahrenheit. That's just enough to keep the pipes from freezing. Mr. Miller gave me a knowing look. He didn't ask any questions. He knew exactly how Chloe treated people around town, and he had witnessed Julian's passivity often enough. That is well within your rights, Mrs. Weber. The account is officially under your name anyway. I'll update the remote access password in the system right now. You'll have the new code on your phone in 5 minutes. When I left the coffee shop, I felt the biting November wind, but I was warm. Back at the house, they would soon realize that the rooms they had stolen from me weren't nearly as cozy as they thought. Chloe loved it tropical. She always turned the bathroom heat up to the max. Starting tonight, she was going to learn what it meant to live in a house where you don't respect the owner. I went back to the motel and picked up a good book on the way. The week had just begun, and I had plenty of time. By late afternoon, the first text from Julian started coming in. Mom, the heat upstairs isn't working. It's freezing. Did you call a repairman? I read the message, deleted it, and turned the page. By the third day, I couldn't stand being cooped up in the motel room anymore. I missed my garden, my hydrangeas, and the fresh air. I decided to take a drive past the house, not to go inside or beg, but just to see how things were unfolding. I took the bus and got off 2 stops early so I wouldn't be spotted. As I approached the property, I saw Chloe's big SUV sitting in the driveway. It was filthy. Normally, she had it detailed every Saturday, but without the joint account funds, the budget for those little luxuries seemed tight. I walked around to the back garden gate, using the old, heavy iron key I still kept in my pocket. The yard looked neglected. Leaves from the plum tree were scattered all over the lawn. Suddenly, the patio door slid open. Chloe walked out wrapped tightly in a thick wool blanket, her arms crossed over her chest. Her nose was bright red from the chill. When she spotted me standing by the fence, she stopped dead in her tracks, her face twisted with anger. "You," she yelled across the lawn. "You turned off the heat. The kids are freezing. Julian is sitting at his desk in a heavy winter coat. This is harassment." Evelyn. I stood perfectly still by the gate, hands buried deep in my coat pockets. The city codes and insurance only require me to keep the pipes from freezing Chloe. I said loudly enough for her to hear. 59 degrees is perfectly legal and prevents mold. If you want it warmer, you are more than welcome to put a utility contract in your own name. But for that, you'll need a bank account with actual money in it. "We live here too," she shrieked, her voice cracking from the cold and frustration. "You live in my house," I corrected her gently. "And you told me there was no room for me. Now I am simply acting like a landlord who is watching her expenses." Julian stepped out onto the patio behind her. He looked pale, with dark circles under his eyes. He looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He finally understood that his mother wasn't a weak, fragile old woman you could just ship off to a motel. He took a step forward, but Chloe grabbed his arm. I turned around and walked back to the bus stop. It was Thursday, and my week at the motel was drawing to a close. I spent the morning going through the old folders I had wisely packed into my suitcase before leaving. They contained the contracts for the internet, the trash pickup, and the electricity. Everything was under my name and tied to my personal account. I called the utility company. I didn't cancel the service because that would have caused too many bureaucratic headaches. Instead, I changed the plan. I switched from the comfortable flat rate option to a strict pay-as-you-go tier that required me to manually authorize usage increases each month. Meaning, if the electricity consumption exceeded the limit, I calculated for a single person the system would automatically throttle. No more running the washing machine non-stop. No more hour-long hot showers for Chloe while I sat in a motel. In the afternoon, I got a call from my older brother Arthur, who lived a couple of towns over. "Evelyn," he said in his deep, calm voice, "Julian called me. He was complaining that you cut off their money and are freezing them out of the house. He sounded pretty desperate." "And what did you tell him, Arthur?" I asked, looking out the motel window at the train tracks. Arthur chuckled softly. "I told him he's a 38-year-old man and his mother doesn't owe him free rent and utilities for the rest of his life. I told him if my daughter-in-law packed me off to a motel, I'd burn the house down, not just turn down the thermostat. You're doing the right thing, sis. Don't let them back you into a corner." Those words gave me a surge of strength. This wasn't a family feud. It was a long overdue reality check. They had assumed old age made me defenseless and compliant. They forgot that my husband and I had paid off this house brick by brick, sacrificing vacations and luxuries to do it. Tomorrow, my week at the motel would end, and I intended to be home right in time for dinner. For sides. On Friday afternoon, at exactly 4 o'clock, I stood in front of my own front door. I hadn't taken a cab. I walked the distance from the station, my suitcase gripped firmly in my hand. The wind was icy and the sky was a heavy, dark slate gray. I slipped my key into the lock and turned it. The door opened with a familiar soft click. The house was eerily quiet. It smelled of stale food and dampness. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw a small space heater sitting in the living room, struggling to warm up the massive space. Julian was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at the cold radiator. Chloe was in the kitchen, trying to heat water on a small camping stove, because the electric range had obviously pulled too much power and tripped the breaker under the new restricted energy plan. They looked at me like I was a ghost. There was no trace left of the arrogance they had displayed on Monday. "I'm back," I said, setting my suitcase down in the hall and taking off my coat. "My week at the motel is up. It was very clean, by the way." Chloe dropped her spoon into the pot. Her hands were shaking slightly. "You ruined our lives, Evelyn. In a matter of 4 days. The kids are staying at a friend's house because it's unlivable in here. Are you proud of yourself?" I took a step toward her and looked her dead in the eye. I didn't raise my voice and my expression didn't change. "You told me there was no room for me in my own home, Chloe. You hauled my furniture down to the basement and discarded me like an old piece of junk. All I did was show you how much room you actually have in this house when I withdraw my support. And as you can see without me, it's pretty damn cold and dark in here." Julian stood up from the couch. He looked at me not with anger, but with a deep, almost childlike defeat. "What do you want from us, Mom?" I sat down at the kitchen table. I didn't ask them to join me. It was my table. Julian and Chloe remained standing like 2 employees called into the manager's office. I opened my black notebook and laid it flat in front of me. "Here are the new terms under which this house will be run moving forward," I said, pointing to the neatly written lines. "First, my bedroom upstairs will be restored to its exact original state by tomorrow night. Leo's desk can go into the room you currently use for storage. Second, we are drawing up a formal lease agreement. Starting the 1st of next month, you will pay fair market rent for the rooms you occupy. That money will be wired in advance to my private account." Chloe tried to cut in, but I simply raised my hand slightly and she fell silent. It was amazing how quickly you could teach people to listen when you held the keys to their daily comfort. "Third," I continued, "the utility accounts for electricity, gas, and internet will be transferred into Julian's name. You will cover the costs of your own consumption. If you don't pay the bills, you'll sit in the dark, not me. My section of the house will be put on a separate submeter, which I'm having an electrician install next week. And fourth, decisions regarding this house are made by me alone. If a single piece of my furniture is moved again without my explicit permission, your lease is terminated within 30 days. We can't afford that," Chloe blurted out. "We were trying to save—" "Then you'll need to find a smaller apartment," I replied coldly. "Nobody is forcing you to live here. You thought the house belonged to you just because I'm getting older. But as long as I am drawing breath, every single square foot of this property belongs to me. You have 24 hours to decide whether you accept these terms or pack your bags." I stood up, took my suitcase, and walked upstairs to my room. They hadn't disassembled the bed frame yet. They had just taken the mattress and bedding. I hauled my mattress back up from the basement and went to sleep. The next morning, the air in the house was still crisp, but the atmosphere had shifted entirely. When I walked into the kitchen, Julian was brewing coffee. The camping stove was gone. They had learned to manage the appliances so they wouldn't trip the restricted power limit. He looked up at me and silently set a mug down. "Chloe is packing her things," he said quietly, avoiding my gaze. "She says she can't live like this. She's moving back in with her parents until we find a place of our own." I took the mug and sat down. "And what are you doing, Julian?" I asked calmly. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the gray garden, the same yard he used to play in as a little boy when his father was still alive. "I can't afford an apartment on my own right now, Mom. My salary isn't enough to support Chloe's lifestyle and cover high rent in the city." I told her I'm staying. "I'll sign the lease and pay you the rent. I'll help you move the rest of your bedroom furniture back up this afternoon." I didn't feel a sense of triumph. It was more the relief of a mother watching her son finally wake up after years of sleepwalking. He had let his wife dictate how he should treat his own mother, and now he was bearing the consequences of that weakness. "Good," I said. "The lease is on the hallway table. Sign it when you've made up your mind. And Julian, tell your wife to make sure she packs thoroughly. I don't want to smell any traces of her perfume in the hallway anymore." That afternoon, Julian helped me carry my old wardrobe back upstairs in total silence. Each piece of furniture that returned to its rightful place felt like a piece of territory reclaimed from an occupying force. Chloe left the house at 4 o'clock. She didn't even glance my way as she loaded her bags into the dirty SUV. I stood by the window and watched her drive away. She thought she could drive me out, but in the end, she was the one who had to leave. A half-month went by. The heat in the house was running normally again, but only because Julian had transferred the first utility payment on time out of his own paycheck. The sub-meters for the electricity were installed, creating a clear, unmistakable boundary between our living spaces. The upstairs floor belonged to him. The main floor and the garden belonged to me. It was a Sunday evening and the house was filled with a quiet peace I hadn't felt in years. No loud phone conversations from Chloe echoing through the halls, no condescending glares, no suffocating tension. Julian knocked softly on my kitchen door, holding a plate with a few sandwiches. "Mind if I sit for a minute, Mom?" he asked, quietly. I nodded and pointed to the chair across from me. He sat down and ate in silence. It wasn't a picture-perfect happy family reunion, but it was honest. We had stripped away the illusions and agreed on raw reality. He respected me again, not because he had to, but because he had learned what happened when I drew my lines. "Chloe filed for divorce," he said after a while, his voice steady, almost relieved. "She says a man who lets his mother dictate how he lives isn't a real man. But I think she just finally realized there's no more free ride here." "It's better this way, Julian," I said, placing my hand over his for a brief moment. "A house needs a strong foundation. If you try to build it on lies and exploitation, it collapses during the very first storm. You pay your rent, you keep your space clean, and you are my son. That is more than enough." When he went upstairs later that night, I turned off the kitchen lights and walked into my bedroom. The window was cracked open just an inch, letting in the cool, clean night air. I hadn't needed lawyers, police, or grand speeches. My house was my home again, a sanctuary of peace that I would never again share with anyone who didn't respect my name. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that I had successfully defended my place in this world.